How do we transition students from kids ministry to student ministry? And how do we walk alongside the entire family during this time of high anxiety? On this episode of Student Ministry Connection, Jay Reynolds joins us to share how he and his church have created a seamless transition in their ministry and how we can do that as well. Welcome to Student Ministry Connection, a podcast for those who serve in student ministry, but also want to connect with others and continue to grow as disciples and leaders. My name is Steve Cullum, and I've served in student ministry since 1999. In addition to being a youth pastor myself, I'm also a missionary with National Network of Youth Ministries, where I get to help personally encourage, professionally equip, and spiritually strengthen youth leaders for faithful and effective ministry with the next generation. Early in my ministry, I really didn't think a lot about helping students enter from kids ministry. But over the years, God has shown me how important that transition is. The years that I've done it well have completely transformed my middle school ministry. And so today, I'm so excited for you to hear from Jay Reynolds, who is a veteran youth pastor at Hope Community Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. Jay really understands the importance of this milestone in a kid's life, and his church has created an amazing process for walking alongside the whole family before, during, and after it. But before we jump into that chat with Jay, let's pause to thank the sponsor of this episode. G-Shades is a youth ministry curriculum and teaching strategy focused on helping students see every life situation through the lens of the gospel. G-Shades has options to fit everyone with 3 plans to choose from. This curriculum gives you the resources that you need to do what you do better. Do you just need message outlines, a discussion guide, and a game? That's just over $200. Looking for a higher production value, including bumper videos, Instagram devotionals, and parent guides? That's just over $300. Or do you want an affordable, engaging video curriculum? G-Shades has you covered for just over $400. You will not find a youth ministry video curriculum at that price point anywhere else. There are lots of great curriculum options out there, but G-Shades is set apart because every lesson focuses so much on Jesus and how to see the world and life situations through the lens of the gospel. You can also learn more about the creator, Mike Haynes, on episodes 32, 55, and 93 of this podcast. So head over to gshades.org to download Season 5 of G-Shades Youth Ministry Curriculum. And be sure to use the promo code CONNECTION at checkout to save $20 off your order. G-Shades, seeing life through the lens of the gospel. Thank you so much, G-Shades, for sponsoring this episode. You can find the link to G-Shades in the podcast show notes. Well, Jay, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much for having me. Just look forward to just sharing some of what God's done in my ministry and hopefully to be able to encourage some other folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, it's been really cool for me to see, for the most part, your ministry from afar, but impressed and told you I've been wanting to get you on the podcast for a little while. And so here we are. So
You're
for my sake and the sake of our audience, I'd love for you to start in your story. How'd you meet Jesus? How'd you get started in ministry itself?
Yeah, man, that's such a loaded question. And I'm sure I can kind of give you the highlight reel more than the unabridged version. But I'm a good old pastor, so I could talk for days, but I'll try to keep it short. Man, God has changed my life, And whenever I was a kid, I had a little bit of a rough childhood and, kind of one where, my dad, he struggled with alcohol and, just some family tension stuff and type of things. And whenever I was sick, my dad actually took his own life. And so that was just very heartbreaking. That kind of led
Wow.
to my mom moving us from, just around family and everything. We're from a small community in Pennsylvania, and both my dad's family and my mom's family were all close all together. But just the tension that just brought, put on her, it was healthier for us to move, 40 minutes, an hour down the road than it was to stay close to all of that. And so that was just very challenging. But my mom made sure we were in church every weekend. Me personally, I had probably about 6 years, from about 6 until I was 12, where I suffered from nightmares.
Mm.
And so it was really heartbreaking. But the good news in that was when I was 12, I accepted Jesus, and I got baptized. And it's about the same time all that, those nightmares stopped,
Wow.
and peace of the Lord, man. But like any, not like any, but, teenagers just deal with stuff, and I just told you a little bit of just some of the stuff that I was dealing with. My brother, my mom, we were all dealing with, just the trauma of our early childhood. And I think I got to a point where when I was about 16 where, I knew God, I knew him in my head, but I would say, just the true living out the relationship stuff wasn't in practice. So I knew it, but I wasn't, I stopped going to church, and so I became probably a lukewarm Christian at best. I never denounced my faith, but I wasn't actively pursuing it either.
Mm.
And so probably from 16 to 21, I went to art school, I joined the military. I started off at college. I just was living for myself, and whenever I was 21, my brother, he was involved in crew at his college, Campus Crusade for Christ. And he just said, "Hey, Jay, you got to go to church. You got to get back to church." And man, I call it, it was my spiritual two by four smack upside my head and pointing me right in the right direction. I didn't make any major changes at that point, but a couple months later, there was a small crew at the college I went to, and crew played a pretty integral part in my life of pointing me back to Jesus. A few months later after that, I went to a worship festival called Creation. And I don't know if you ever heard of that,
Mm.
but just a few days, just a worship environment with a ton of people. I met God again there in that
Mm.
space. And there's thousands of people around, but I just feel like God was talking directly to me.
Mm.
And that's kind of, I'd say, the moment when I was about 21 where I said, God, if you are really the real deal, like you need to take this trauma from my past. I was caught up in some other things. I said, you need to take the temptations that are my way. And God honored that. That started my process of really healing from stuff with my dad, and just started putting me on like a path to say, God, I just want to follow you,
Mm.
and so I did. And so that was about 21, 22. I knew that, I just want to follow where God was leading me. A few years later, I found myself in the middle of Iraq, with the military, and man, I had a fruitful ministry in Iraq. I started Bible studies,
Wow.
one-on-one discipleship, and it was very interesting. People were willing to talk about spiritual things in the afterlife whenever you're presented with danger. That's for sure.
Yeah,
And
bet.
yeah,
Wow.
that could be a whole nother conversation later. I did learn how to drive an M1A1 tank, but just some skill sets you kind of throw in your belt. It's easy to pull a seventh grader back in whenever you kind of drop some of those things.
Right, right. I
But
will
man,
I will chase you down with a tank.
yes, yes. But man, when I was probably about 27, I went on a mission trip to India. And 10 days in India, I was a volunteer with a high school ministry at the point, actually here at the church I'm currently at. And I went on a 10-day mission trip with just a few other adults, a few other leaders that were serving alongside. And 10 days in India, God confirmed my calling to full-time vocational ministry. And so when I came home, I left the corporate world. I was a graphic designer in a corporate office, and I said yes to Jesus. And so I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do for work, but Jesus said go. And I said, okay, let's do this. And so I jumped out of the boat, man, and without really a plan, but just straight obedience.
Mm.
And a few months later, just a job opening came open here at Hope Community Church. And so I stepped in. I had no clue what I was doing, but, it's kind of one of those, said yes to Jesus, but it didn't come with a manual. For those of the parent, it's very similar. It's like you have a kid. Now what do I do? It was kind of one of those situations, but I said, hey, I know that God's called me full time vocational ministry. My goal in life is to bring God the glory that he deserves, and that's what he called me to. And
Mhm.
so I said, that's what I'm going to go do. So I chased
Wow.
after it, man.
That's so cool. And man, yeah, to overcome so many significant things in your life, and the fact that you're still able to hear God through all that and his calling, and shout out to those campus ministries like Crew and so many other amazing ministries like that. My wife's story is very similar, where college ministry, campus ministry was really what kind of directed her on the right path as well. And
Yeah.
so crucial at those ages, especially, because you're coming from all these different places, all these different backgrounds, and it's such a
Yep.
crucial time to be there, for sure. So when you stepped into ministry, what was your first ministry? Was it immediately student ministry, or was it something else? Or
Yeah. So I was a volunteer for about 2.5 years, just with high school ministry. When I moved from Pennsylvania to North Carolina, I knew one person that I went to college with. And then I had like 19 like ninth grade guys. And so I was like, I loved it. It was phenomenal. It was just like I already had the heart of a youth pastor and didn't know it yet, but I just got plugged in and was just hanging out in the ministry. And as the high school pastor, I said, "Hey, I'm available. What can I do to help out?" And I teach a message here or there. Anytime we went on a trip, I just said, I just want to be available. Design is in my background, so I was like, "Hey, you want me to create some cool graphic stuff for you?" Just like it was just like, how can I use my gifts and talents to
Mm,
serve? And whenever I was hired on, the right before I was hired on, the middle school pastor left and God called him to go plant a church. And so he went and planted a church, which was great, except for the only hard thing coming in for the new person was it took all the volunteers with him.
uh,
And so that was very challenging. So not only did I not know what I was doing, I also walked in a situation where there's no leaders. But like I said, I was available, and I was too young and dumb to know what I was walking into. And I just said yes to it.
yeah.
But my first role was a middle school pastor, and that's kind of what I stepped into. But I had no clue what I was doing, and it was kind of one of those situations where about 9 months in, high school pastor looked at me. He's like, "You doing okay?" And I lost it,
Mm,
just emotionally. And I said, "There's too big of a learning curve." I said, "There's tons of kids showing up. I don't know what to do with them."
mm,
I said yes to Jesus, and I'm like, but I don't know, like now I'm like, oh, what's your system? What's your vision? Where are you trying to take them? I was like, I didn't know any of that.
yeah.
First year ministry stuff, I think very similar to like first year teacher stuff. It's just like there's a lot of hard, a lot of, identity stuff. Who am I? Like I said yes to you, Jesus, but I don't know what this means. And it was a situation where probably about 9, 10 months in, I was just very vulnerable, very honest with my boss. And that started a process. We were at a position where we could bring somebody in to oversee the middle school ministry. And actually I was able to really apprentice under,
Mm,
that person for just a long time,
wow.
and so it actually taught me a lot of how to build a ministry, and, because I think of being a student pastor, part of it is the faithfulness to the calling, said, yes, now what do I do?
Yeah.
And man, we're in a lot of the similar, Facebook groups that we see, people asking just a derivative of that question. Like,
Yep.
man, I said, yes, but what do I do?
Yep.
And man, that's where I was, but man, my heart, is for middle school kids, it started out with high school kids, but once I started, I had somebody, come in and teach me how to do middle school ministry. My heart started just like to be there,
Mm,
zaniness, the craziness, the
yeah.
the life change, the outreach potential,
Mm,
and things like that. We got to see God do some pretty amazing things.
yeah. That's so awesome. And yeah, when I think of middle school ministry, this image just popped in my head when you were explaining it of back in my, engineering and science dream days before God grabbed my heart for ministry as well. And I think of the potential energy. It's just sitting there and waiting. And if we can harness it well, man, middle schoolers can be amazing. They can
Oh,
also be annoying, but they can also be quite amazing if we're able to harness that.
oh, for sure, for sure. So yeah, man, I've been here at Hope Community Church for this month is actually 15 years I've been
Wow.
on staff.
That's cool.
So technically I'm still in my first ministry job.
Mm,
Now my role has changed over the years, but I went from being, in a primary seat as a middle school pastor to a secondary seat and being taught ministry, and then I stepped into a role for a season of overseeing all programming for middle school ministry. We went from a church of being one site to two. Few years later, we added a third site, and we were a 3 campus church for a little while, and then down the road, we launched 2 other campuses. So we
mm,
now sit in a spot where we have 5 campuses. I was a student pastor over all student ministry for a few years, and over this past year, I kind of morphed into a little bit of role for all family ministry, just involved in overseeing all the programming. And
nice.
so a little bit mixture of creativity. So I still get to tap into some of that, but also at the same point, what are we doing with kids when they show up in our spaces?
Yeah.
And so I still have a huge foot in student ministry. Can't keep me away from that, but I still kind of help be able to speak into some stuff happening in children's ministry, all that kind of stuff as well.
That's so cool. Yeah. And to take you from, yeah, such a humble beginning, a humility kind of stance that you took, like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then here we are 15 years later, and God has continued to increase your leadership and giving you more responsibility in the kingdom. And
Yeah.
thanks for honoring that as you continue to grow as a leader and leading lots and lots of students and families and kids to Jesus.
Well,
So
man, I appreciate that. I
yeah.
appreciate that greatly, man.
Yeah. So I think it's fun to, especially knowing that you guys have multiple campuses and all these different changes. You've been at your church for 15 years now. So I imagine things have evolved and changed in terms of your programming and all that stuff. So what's your ministry currently look like? What do you, how do you guys do student ministry, and what's your role kind of in all that?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, having 5 campuses, and some of the campuses would be constituted as a large student ministry. Some would be constituted as like a very small student ministry, and so with the reins of programming, currently my role is, programming over all family ministry, environments. I'm on a central team, and so I don't have campus responsibilities, that's just kind of where I serve, but I lead on a central team to try to help resource the campuses, to be able to do ministry. And so we have our eclectic challenges, so how do you program for when there's 100 kids in the room, and how do you plan for when there's 5? But we have a good relationship, a working relationship between our central and our campuses. And we try to, contextualize, it's just like central may say, hey, here's a plan, here's an idea. Understanding some of the ideas may work a little bit better in the smaller, some of the ideas may work better in the bigger. But for campus teams, take and use the plan for what's helpful for you, but also contextualize it for the kids you have in the room. You leverage the vehicle of relationships in which you have to be able to meet kids where they are.
Mm.
Yeah. Have I seen change in ministry? Just a little bit. We joked at my church, we used to have bumper stickers to be the change. Change is one of the most constant things in life, even though we just want steadiness. And so, just just been true of just what ministry environments have looked like. But at the end of the day, we have a team here that of people that want to help see kids know who Jesus is and make him more real, more present in his lives, as well as elevating parents into that role of being the primary discipler of their own kids. And so, not just we're the church, we're going to do that, drop your kid off, and we do that for you.
Yeah.
But especially in the last few years, we've tried to get a lot more airtime to that, just to try to help parents and give them the tools, right? I mean, for so long, for years, see, I know you've been in youth ministry for a long time, but you have the tools of how can we walk alongside leaders and set them up to be the champions, be the youth pastors, all those types of things. But especially lately in the world we live in now, we can't expect that parents know how to do that anymore,
Yeah.
and so how do we do that,
Mm.
and create milestone moments, create memory makers, moments for parents to be able to slow down and see their
Mm.
kid for who they are,
Mm.
not just stay there, but just take them and draw them closer to Jesus as well. And so
That's awesome.
just a mixture of all that stuff is what we're trying to do. Do we hit that mark all the time? No, but we try, right?
Yeah. That's awesome. So one of those milestone markers that you alluded to is this transition from kids ministry to
Yeah.
middle school ministry or student ministry, depending on how your church has got it set up. And we both of us responded to someone the other day in a Facebook group that was asking this question. And I feel like this question's asked a lot around how do you transition students well from your kids ministry to your student ministry? Before we jump into what you guys do, what's your history and experience been like with that? Because I imagine like your first year as a middle school pastor, you're probably like, I don't even know this is important. I know I was there at one point. It was years later that I'm like, oh yeah, we should probably focus on that. So what was your history with that? When did you finally realize that like this is something we should really be focusing on?
Yeah, a great question. I think like just like the progression of being in the role of a student pastor, it's just like, what's a little bit more I can pick up? What's a little bit more I can pick up? Yeah, first year, I didn't even know there was, new sixth graders coming, if I'm honest, right? It's just like, wait, more kids showed up one day. What just happened?
And they're smaller. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, wait, I lost those taller kids. Now I got shorter kids, and it's like, what is happening? But I also noticed like for my church, some of what's going on in our culture. We're in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. Is we started going to year-round schools as well. And so not only just complexity in transition, we started noticing about probably like 14, 13 years ago that more schools are becoming year rounds, which is very odd comparatively to, just a lot of other places in the country. Right. And so it was another kicker for us. So we promote in July now, but this is also another change. It's just like, oh, and that promotion weekend, right? That's another conversation. When do you do that?
Hmm.
Do you do that in June? Do you do that in August? Well, for us, our new school year ends in June for year round schools, and literally a week later starts for some tracks in July. And so
Wow.
this would be a whole nother conversation one day, but
Yeah.
I put it in timeline. I actually wrote it out it was a little bit of progression. For me, first, it was understanding, okay, there are students that are stepping into this and they're probably freaked out. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know where they're going. And so I think that was the first layer, right? Starting with
Mm.
students, like our primary audience, students, and then, I told you a little bit about, the guy who came in over me. He's a great friend now. And he brought an event to the table and said, hey, we're going to do an event. I used to do this, in my previous setting, but we're going to do it and we're going to crush it. We're going to call it Best of the Mess. And we're going to do it over 2 days and it's going to be amazing. I was like, what are you talking about? It was like, okay. But a lot of it was focused on students. And it's like, we'll try to get leaders if we can, but mainly it was students. Let's teach them, show them. It was very specific event just for them.
Mm.
As time went on, we said, okay, we need to get better at leaders, right? You keep the momentum for students, but how do we add in more intentionality with leaders? And then it was like, next tier, parents, and so we started doing some like parent info sessions, like, strengthening what we were doing for parents, because entering into the middle school phase is very unique. It's a time, I mean, as you know, studied a lot of the stuff. It's like the brain's growing.
Mhm.
A lot of kids are taking steps in their own faith or denouncing their parents' faith. And it's like such a weird time frame. So we said, man, let's help educate parents, just on brain stuff, not just on what we do, but like walk alongside and help to inform them on physiology type things. And then we even got to a point where we said, hey, why let's let's invite parents even into all this mess stuff too.
Mm.
And I'll tell you, the first time we did that, Steve, that parents were very hesitant. There was a dad in full jeans, like this is the middle of summer, like we're playing games like shaving cream wars and like breakfast tug of war and like condiment like balloon pop. Like
Yeah.
this is gross stuff. And I had dad, like he looked at me, he's like, wait, I can get in the middle of this with my kid. He said, I'm
Huh.
all in. There was
Mm.
a ton of parents around. There was like, a catalyst of like three. And this is like, you know what? Hey, maybe next year we'll have 10,
Yeah.
and it was just like, let's invite them into this milestone event with their
Mm.
kid. And it was phenomenal because I just saw this in action and he was all in, covered in shaving cream. His pants were probably ruined. But you know what that did was that showed his kid that he was there being willing to be in the mess with him,
Mm.
and what that kind of taught our staff team was like, man, we need to make it as easy as we can for parents to be involved in the mess of what could be middle school,
Mm.
in the mess, because it's not just one thing to get into our program. Yes, we want that, right? But it's even more so, how do we remind that parent to be involved in their kid's life
Mm.
through the hard that they're going to go through?
Mm.
It takes intentionality.
Yeah.
I would say the other layer that it hit me at one point was, as a student pastor, I've worked so hard to make it as seamless on my end. But what was I doing to actually build a bridge but
Mm.
with the children's ministry?
Mm.
And so we'd say, hey, can we just come in your environment and promote the thing we're doing? And it's just like, and I mean, everybody's running 100 miles an hour in different directions. And we just kind of slowed down. And I remember one year just with the children's ministry person, I was like, hey, I have really some thoughts and ideas, but before any of this becomes action, can we just work together?
Mm.
Like I was like, I'll do 98% of the work, but can we take the 2% and collaborate?
Mm.
Because the reality is like, I already had all the programming there, and so it was just like, it was very much a mind shift, just like all the progression. So, I mean, quickly to go through that, the layers was, there was a student layer, there was a leader layer, a parents, and then just even other stuff, you
Mm.
know, and I go through all that because I just think of somebody listening to this that are like, where do I even start?
Yeah.
How do I even take a step? Like, even before I even unpack what I do, like, man, goodness, just take your next one.
Mm.
Wherever you're at, like, I mean, I'll unpack what we do. It's a little bit of a robust system, but hear me clearly. It did not happen. There wasn't a change from last year to this year.
Yeah.
It's been an evolution over probably a decade
Mm.
to where it is now.
Yeah.
And so that's also the other part of it. I think of just, I had to learn to give myself grace. Like,
Mm.
oh, I'd love to, it's like you have these creative ideas. I love to do all these things,
Yeah.
but what's my next step?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's my next step? What's my next layer I can add? What's the
Mm.
next intentionality that I can put into this to make it worth it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, we tell that with students, we're teaching them, all these things that God wants to change in your life. Absolutely. But start with one and then move on from that point. Same thing with changes in ministry. Yes, we could have a huge change in how we transition kids to student ministry, but man, start small. But with that in mind, like you said, what is your big picture? How does this work in your setting as you're currently doing it?
Yeah. And so I mentioned already just some of the complexities, in my church environment. And so that was just the need to get other people involved. But what we do now is we call our fifth grade year is our twisted year. What we learned in our culture is that there were, and this might be, happening all over, but for us, we noticed like fifth graders, probably starting about February, March timeframe, just started checking out,
Hmm.
in our children's ministry environments, and so, just it makes it really hard if we start the promotion in April, May, or June for something that we're doing in student ministry in July and they're not there. If 50% of the people aren't there, then you missed them, right? And so the other part of that is when we start, so some of what you're hearing is we took some time to really study who are our people and where are they at, and so that's kind of where some of our thoughts started. And as we noticed, we said, well, what if, you put some of the, well, what if, could we try this? What if we took our whole fifth grade year and just had some higher degrees of intentionality? Now this is after we built a bridge with Kid City, and just trying to think through it. And that's what we call our children's program is, they started kind of owning a lot more of the thought process of where a fifth grader is, right? And this
Mhm.
is kind of where we built a bridge and met in the middle. And so what we kind of came up with is that in about September timeframe, we have year round and we have traditional schools. So we have this hot mess, but everybody's in school when it comes September. So in about September timeframe, we put a new event on the calendar and it's just a kickball event. Every campus does their own. And so they can kind of change some of the nuances of it, whether it's like a smaller campus, invite the whole family, invite leaders, invite your whole church to be part of it, or your campus. A larger one, it's just like it's only fifth graders and their parents, type of thing. But the primary audience is the fifth grader at the beginning of their fifth grade year and their parent. And so we leverage fun that builds trust and it's just enjoyable. Oh, that's something I want to go to. Two, we have like a parent experience, just helping to walk alongside parents, just that observation of, hey, this is kind of what this year is. Don't be surprised when you get to February and your kid's like, I don't want to go to church anymore, and because that probably will happen.
Mm.
There's more data that says it will happen than it won't, is that they're gonna just feel like they're too old for the children's ministry environment. At the event, we also, just we give them some memory making stuff like, make tie-dye shirts, just some things that are very intentional that kind of calls them into something more than just themselves and a little bit of that collective mindset as a campus. Happens at campuses, we invite the middle school team and the children's ministry team to work together at their campuses for that. So just starting to build some very specific relationships. So at the beginning of their fifth grade year, they're starting to meet the middle school team, right? And so that way, at the end of the year, it's not just hard left. Wait, now who's this person that I have to trust?
Mm.
It's like it's starting over time to just develop relationships. That's one layer. We move into about from October through March, an email campaign. This is kind of like meant for more education stuff. It's emails to parents. It's a lot more like phase-based learning type things. This is who your kid is. This is kind of what's going on. This is where they're at. It's email, so it's a little kind of low-hanging fruit, but it's routine once a month. All of it can be scheduled, and so it's not a demand on one person, but it makes it easy for just consistent communication with an eclectic audience. That leads us into about March. We do another twisted event. This is one we do all in. We bring in all the campuses to one place. And we actually made a change this year. We took our Best of the Mess event and our Twisted Arcade event, and we just combined it to be one
Hmm.
event instead of two. And so instead of waiting until July for them to come into middle school, the year prior, we learned that more families came to this Twisted Arcade event, and so said, hey, let's just double down, put more emphasis, more energy there, and which in that we have another parent experience
Hmm.
led by one of the student ministry, pastors. So they're getting to hear the heart of a student pastor, parents building very specific relationships.
Mhm.
We also invite leaders to be there with their kids. And so whether a children's ministry fifth grade leader is moving up with them or not.
Mm,
It's leverage your relationship you have to help the kid make that transition, And so that's just some of our language. It's like, how do you maximize the relationships you have? Because especially when a leader's not moving up, it's, hey, can you come at this event and almost pass the baton of like,
mm,
hey, this is who you're going to go hang out with. I'm not coming with you, but this is who you're going to be. It's like, I don't know about you, Steve, but for me, like, whenever it's like that passed on relationship, like,
mm.
you're giving your like approval to like what they're moving into is
Yeah.
so much better than just a cold call, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so that's another area. We had so much fun. I'd love to unpack that event maybe in a little bit, but at that event, we just tried to make it memory making, milestone moment type thing, a little bit larger than life. So a little bit of intrigue, a little bit of draw, a little bit of
Mhm.
fun. But at the same point, we end on sharing the gospel and we end with parents praying over their kid,
Mm,
And so as much as the big that you want to have, it's still getting the focus and intentionality of a parent is just praying over their own child, and not to miss out on that. And I love doing the large stuff, man. I tell you, my favorite part of the night is that right there,
mm,
where parents are, you guide them to just be intentional with
mm,
leading their kid, right? And so that's just such a sweet time. From there, we move into, we call it, we take tours.
mm.
So we have different tour dates. And so that just between March and June, we say at least 3 times of just take your kids from your 5th grade environment into your middle school environment. We have Sunday morning program for middle school. That's our small group environments. And it does look different than our children's ministry environments. And so we thought over time, we're like, why don't we just bring them in to see what they're walking into?
Yeah.
And and so that before they're here, let's just show them what it is, and we have some dates on the calendar. We communicate out to parents, after they check in, through all the protocols of children's ministry environments. One of their leaders brings them into the middle school environment. And, some of those tour dates, they may stay the whole time to see what teaching looks like and the differences with teaching. Some may just stay just for, say, the game time, type of thing. But overall, within the 3 tour dates, they should get a good idea of what middle school ministry is, just some of the practical steps. Where do I go now? How does this work? I've been going, for years to children's ministry,
Mm,
which I make a right. Now I make a left, where I
right.
go up the stairs or whatever it is, within like just some of the logistics, but it's making it manageable, right?
Mm,
For those kids that are there every week, then they're going to pick it up pretty easy. But we also, in my context, we have families that only show up 2 times a month.
yeah.
And so it's like they're not there every week. And
Mm,
so just doing one, tour date, it's just like, well, if they didn't make it, they didn't make it. It's just like, well, let's increase that. It's pretty easy within logistical, logistic stuff. It's just who's bringing them between the environments, and they just get back before they get checked out, And then it just our year ends on our promotion weekend in first in July.
mm,
That's when they are new in the middle school environment, and it's go time.
mm.
Here we are, and so that's a little bit of a lengthy process. Some folks might be hearing that. It's like, wait, your transition process is better part of a year. Yes, it is. And what we've learned is that over time, that just one event is good for the event's sake, but in moving a mass population of people, that we learned, like, we need to have multi access points. We need to have some low hanging fruit moments, make it very easy so that it feels more like a progression and less like a hard right turn,
Mm.
and so that's some of the stuff that we've learned over time.
That's cool. Yeah, and just hearing that, I hear how you are focusing on all those different layers. You're hitting the students where they are, understanding that phase of their life. You're talking about parents, you're talking about leaders, you're talking about this whole process that you've definitely thought through all those different pieces. I would love like to hear more about this twisted arcade thing though before we move on to any tips you'd provide. Like what is involved really in that event? Because I'm sure not everybody can pull that off, but what is involved in this?
Dude, I just had a creative moment, and I was just like, last year was the first year we did it, and it's 2024. So it's 2023. And, it was an event that it was a first step. Right. And so I was like, man, goodness, I took this, children's ministry took a lead on it, and it was a great event. but I brought my student ministry, years of experience of student ministry, a little bit of zaniness into the mix. So, man, let me just paint this picture for you. We had an event over about 2.5 hours on a Friday night. So it's a time frame where kids don't have school the next day. We found that for this event, it was a good time frame, well attended year one. Let's maximize on it. As soon as people came in, parents drop their kids off in the kids ministry space like they typically do on a regular weekend. And we brought all of our campuses together. Leaders and kids hung out. They got to meet their middle school pastor. And then the parents actually went to the student ministry space. And so we had one of our high school pastors and our family ministry director, they stepped
Mm,
in and just led the parent time.
mm,
Yeah, we fed parents good.
mm.
We fed them, kids got cardboard pizza. I mean, fast food pizza, whatever you want to call it. But parents, we like had a buffet style pasta, like good pasta, meatballs, chicken parm, like just really treat the parents,
Mm,
and make it special, and made it very intentional. And that's a time where it was just like, hey, we want to partner with you. And that was the intent.
mm.
From there, they had about 30, 40 minutes in those spaces separately. And then we pulled everybody together in the gym. This is where some of the zaniness happens. When they walked in the gym, I probably had about 200, 300 boxes set up as a giant Angry Birds. And so our at this campus, it's like the main auditorium is also a gymnasium. So it makes it really fun to do events like this because you have all the tech
Yeah.
that's extraordinary, while at the same time you have a gym floor, which if you're a student pastor and you have a gym, like use that thing to all of its glory. And so I had probably a 30-foot high Angry Birds box setup and a mounted like launcher system. And it's pretty wild, pretty wild. I'll find a picture and send it to you.
Yeah.
But it was what I really wanted though, was when people walked into the gym was this wow moment.
Mm,
Right? Because I believe wow moments also speak a layer of like, I was ready for you,
mm.
you know? And this is an experience that you don't get if you weren't here, you know?
Yeah.
And so sometimes you maximize on what is that wow moment with intentionality. And that's what I was going for.
Mm.
Now, let me give you a little bit of a womp womp. It's just like, I'm not just gonna sit here and brag. I'm gonna give you the other stuff too. Whenever we launched them, we used foam dodgeballs and hit the box and wouldn't knock them over because the base was so set. It's just like, well, I mean, we could do probably a whole podcast on youth ministry fails.
Yeah.
And so then it was just like trying, like, I'm like, oh, you get another shot. It's just like trying this moment on the fly. I had to cut the second game because I was just trying to like get this thing to work. We eventually got there, but it's like, oh man, it was like pulling teeth.
So
You're in
what?
those moments where
Yeah.
it's all in your mind. You think this is going to work
Right.
and then it doesn't. I'm
Yeah.
sure we've all been there, but
Yeah.
it was still just such a cool moment. We went on from there and we basically had 6 game stations set up,
Mm,
which Angry Birds, that was like the larger than life version. And then it kind of became a little bit more manageable, a little bit
mhm,
more like 2 teams compete against one another and you
mm,
stack them up and launch them. We played Hungry
mm.
Hippos, which that was the craze of like 5 years ago in
Yeah.
youth ministry. We brought that back. But if probably a lot of folks use like Orange's phase stuff.
Mhm,
The icon for that is a skateboard.
mhm,
And so we used all skateboards for that event.
mm,
Um, which at the end of the night, I ended up giving 4, those longboard skateboards away.
hmm.
Just random give on the spot giveaways, right? We got a giant kick darts set up, and so that was just super easy, super fun. We made a Mario Kart version, but we did, the giant yoga balls have handles
Yeah.
and which looks ridiculous, and it was. It's I tell you, here's my moment, Steve, that the parent's gonna be all in if they play that game, because you just look straight up ridiculous.
Right.
And you have parents like literally knocking other parents over, trying to like
Yes.
compete with one lap. It was pretty amazing. I think that event was sponsored by a chiropractor because there's a lot of parents after the fact is like, oh
Yeah.
man. So I already got feedback. I probably got to use like some scooters for that next year, little butt scooters, but it was still fun. We had a photo booth station set up, and just to be able to capture moments
Mm,
that after the event, we sent like a whole like album out to families to
mm,
say, hey, here's that content to, literally, this is the memory you made with your kid. Don't forget it.
mm,
Then the last station we had is, have you ever been to an arcade, and you play the little mini basketball game?
Hmm.
You know, everybody does, right?
Yeah.
And then you're always competing against somebody. So,
Hmm.
man, we took foam board, cut it, 4x8 sheet of foam board, cut it in half, and we used hula hoops and beach balls that look like basketballs. And so we had 4 lanes set up of just like this, basketball game. And so it just looked like pandemonium, but they're all beach balls. So they can go everywhere.
Right.
And it was just fun. So it was just a mixture of just some different game setup that allowed, it was a slightly competitive, but it wasn't over competitive.
Mm.
It was more important about, sharing the laugh and fun and joy with your kid than it was about competing for some prize.
Mm.
And we did that with intentionality, and there's times where you leverage competition to get what you want. There's other times where competition can distract from what you're trying to do. And so this was an event where we just said it's going to be a round robin, kind of like a school like rec day, type of a feel to it. You just kind of a round robin station, just go to the next one, go to the next one. Logistically, it was pretty easy to, set up, but it just allowed teams to be smaller and they were with their campus, parents, kids, leaders, staff,
Mm.
campus staff all rotated together as teams.
Mm.
And what that allowed for, right, through all the fun, relationships are happening, right? So the middle school staff is getting to like play with the fifth grader and it breaks down walls. So what's coming in 3 months is that now I have to look at them as my youth pastor.
Mm.
Now we have a common experience, a
Yeah.
common memory, a common moment that develops trust, right? And so what we found is like you leverage the fun to develop trust.
Yeah.
So in all the zaniness and craziness, it was that, it was really about developing relationships.
Yeah.
So if somebody's hearing this on the podcast, they're like, I could never do that. I don't have the space for that. I don't have, it's like with intentionality step, what I want you to
Mm.
hear, like, yeah, I'm zany and I'm going to do crazy things, but don't miss out on like what is the purpose of it is like for us the purpose was intentionally develop relationships,
Mm.
leveraging a memory making moment, and you can do that at any side of ministry you have. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we ended the night with a small group leader at one of our campuses. I was like, man, he can speak to the parent in the room, he could speak to the fifth grader in the room, and he just shared a message that just unpacked the gospel, but helped to pull in both of those audiences.
Mm.
Because sometimes, in that kind of space, it's hard to talk to a fifth grader and talk to a parent at the same time.
Yeah.
But we got to a point where we shared the gospel and we ended it with parents praying over their kid,
Mm.
like I shared a little bit ago.
Yeah.
And it was just beautiful moment just to see all the relationships happening, all the interactivity, um, just all the fun being had,
Mm.
and here's the cool thing is that in our context for Easter, we don't have any student ministry, environments. We encourage students to go to church with your parents and serve in kids ministry, so a lot of middle school staff are serving in kids ministry. And we purposely encourage the student ministry staff to be in that fifth grade room,
Mm.
because it's another connection point. But to hear some of the feedback is like, oh yeah, it was so cool to see Matthew, because of the relationship that started at Twisted Arcade.
Mm.
And so now as he's leading a Kid City large group environment,
Mm.
it's just like, man, you step into an environment where it's like, I know that guy.
Yeah.
That's my pastor. It's just like
Mm.
you start to identify that way and start to think that way. And that is, in my opinion, that's the hook that will help them take that step in middle school in July.
Mm. That's so good and so fun. And like what you said, it's so intentional, it's purposeful. And I think, looking back through my years of ministry, I know that events like summer camp can be a big turning point for students. They come in as a brand new sixth grader and all of a sudden they walk out and they're like, it's like they've been there forever. And we know that happens, but how can we also create moments like that within our own environment earlier for the same reasons? Zaniness, craziness, intentionality, but they walk out of that event going, I'm not scared about entering middle school anymore. I'm excited about it and I can't wait till it happens.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, having all those leaders there, just all those pieces. Yeah, I think like what you said, you can take those elements, even though you maybe can't pull off an event like that, but you can take those elements and still incorporate them into what you're doing. definitely, biting off, what you can chew at the moment, take small steps to get there. Any other advice that you'd offer to anybody else who is wanting to do a better job at this? Where should they start?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting place is, just if you've done nothing, then I think that, you start with between the student and the parent, as I would say, is learning in your context, how can you take a step there is probably your first step. And possibly even parents, as
Mm,
I've gotten older, parents might be better, but kids also need to know a little bit of logistic stuff. They need to know where they're going. Man, Steve, I don't know about you, but in my time in ministry, I've learned some of the most catalytic things that can happen in ministry is whenever you have the buy-in from the actual kid.
mm,
Because I'll tell you is that, if a fifth grader wants to go to middle school, they can't drive themselves. If they're excited about it, who are they going to tell? Their parents and their friends,
mhm,
and an eager fifth grader who wants to go into middle school is going to bother their parent enough to get them to middle school.
mhm,
So partly, if you had to take a step somewhere, then how can you make it relatable for that fifth grader?
mm,
How can you make it an easy step for them? It doesn't have to be another event. It could be, it doesn't have to be, in your context, but it can be, what can be an intentional step that you just increase some of the draw, some of the fun. It doesn't have to be the big or larger than life, but start to understand who a fifth grader is in your context and how can you meet them where they are. And so whether leveraging relationship, whether it be, just getting them excited, but I think, as I've studied just youth ministry in general, the thing that keeps kids coming back is relationships.
yep,
That is probably the biggest transcendent thing across all youth ministries. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter what the programmatics. It doesn't matter what the flow of service is or the night of the week. If they're not in relationships, they're not going to show up.
yep,
You know, um, so I think that's a key component in a big step that you can take is how do you develop the right relationship, right? And some of that might be a little bit of a general question, right? Because it might be a how can I develop that relationship with the kid? Some of it might be how can I develop that relationship with the parent? And some of you folks might be out there like, hey, I've tried some stuff, I have a little bit of traction. Then I would say I would encourage you to start to think some deeper in layers, right? Maybe year one is like I develop a little bit better relationship with leaders. Maybe year two, year three is how do I cultivate them in part of the process, right?
mm,
How do I get them involved? How do I, raise up people in this so that it's not just as a student pastor, it's not just you caring the most about this, right?
mhm,
End of the day, they're coming to you. So if you don't care about it, you might need to start in your own heart and care about it. But the children's ministry folks in your context should have a layer of like caring about how are they sending,
mm,
and I think that, is just part of like the opportunity you have to work with people who work with the kids, and if you're in a volunteer based ministry, man, you can have a very honoring conversation. I mean, I tell you, buy some Chick-fil-A, get some coffee. It honors people in amazing ways. And you call them into, you don't have to have all the ideas, but you call them into, people working with your kids' ministry. Say, hey, you have a power hour that we can just talk about how do we get our fifth graders involved
mm,
in middle school,
mm,
and let's just talk about it. So some of y'all for the first step, really, it might just be just having some intentional conversations like that. And it's nothing outside of what you currently do,
yep,
other than maybe one lunch, but Steve, the biggest thing I learned is just being intentional,
mm,
and taking a step. And a step is better than no steps.
mm,
One step is a lot better than 15 also. Because, and maybe let me just put out a little bit of a reflective thought. If your ministry environment is so drastically different than from your kids' ministry environment, then start to think through like what's at least one or two steps that a kid can take and help them make that step.
mm,
Because there's so much changing in the world of that rising sixth grader. And if I just take a moment and remind you of this, they're going into, chances are, for the common sixth grader, they're going into a new school, which might be new friend groups. Physiology in their brain is changing.
mhm,
So they're questioning themselves. You know, they are going to start getting attitude. And so they're going to start having tension with their parents. They're trying to figure out who they are becoming and they don't know yet. So one day they may show up with pink hair and you just need to look at them like, that, hey, that's awesome. Like, And if you look at them like they're weird, it's just like meet them where they are, and that's just a big thing to remember who that rising sixth grader is and where they're at and help them make that bridge into your ministry,
Mm.
And so I know that one step was probably unpacked a lot more than it should have been, but don't fall into the temptation. You have to have it all figured out. I mean, it took me a decade to get where we are, and so I just want to give a little hope to your listeners here, Steve. Like, don't feel like you have to have everything figured out to take a step either.
Yeah.
Is that marathon is a long way, you may not know where the marathon ends, but you could probably take one or two steps and track that. How did it go? Then next year, make it a little bit better,
Mm.
make it a little bit better, because chances are you mentioned about summer camp, trying to recruit leaders, trying to meet parents where they are, just your routine, regular student ministry stuff. And that this could feel like it's another thing added.
Mm.
I would say don't stress yourself out, but take an intentional step.
Oh, that's so good, Jay. Thank you so much for sharing all that wisdom and experience from your own place. And yeah, all this is somebody so good. I think for people listening to take it just a step away from our conversation around this transition into sixth grade and everything. I would just love to end with giving you an opportunity to speak any encouragement that maybe God's laying on your heart to our audience today. What would you like to say?
I think that where God has me personally is, been speaking to me for a better part of a year is remember him,
Mm.
remember him. And I think that being a youth pastor can equate to being busy, but if in our busyness we lose our intimacy with Jesus, then I think we're missing out on our first calling to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And so, in even in this conversation, if it's too overwhelming to like take like a giant leap, hey, prioritize your relationship with Jesus is going to be filtering everything else, and, in the business of ministry, slow down. I believe it's Exodus 34, 6 through 8, God speaking to Moses on the mountain. And he starts out saying, Yahweh, Yahweh, compassionate, gracious God. See, I've been stuck there the better part of a
Mm.
year because what that says is, how did God speak of himself? And it starts out with the name of God and it starts out with the character of God. And I would say, don't lose focus on who God is,
Mm.
and in such a distractible world we live in, is don't lose out on your intimacy with Jesus. That's probably the biggest thing by encouragement, because that's also where I'm at,
Mm.
and man, I'll tell you, in my day in ministry, being in a programming seat, there was a time where all of my creativity, all my zaniness and seeing kids come to know Jesus and being baptized, my pride came along with that, and my pride became over my calling, and so my encouragement is like, don't let your pride become over your calling,
Mm.
and how do you do that? You keep your focus appropriately on him,
Mm.
and be faithful. I read something recently, it's just like, then God desires a lot more faithfulness than he desires, a bigger ministry,
Mm.
and so I think of slowing down. If you've given up your quiet time for preaching, then, I think you have it mixed up.
Mm.
Make your quiet time with Jesus your best part of your week and not I didn't have any time for that.
Yeah.
And I think that not just this transition conversation, but I think other aspects of you being a leader that God has called you to be, I think would be greatly enhanced by your intimacy with Jesus increasing.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Jay, thank you so much for being on today. I know people are going to want to connect with you even more. So how can they find you online and maybe ask some follow-up questions or see some pictures of this awesome Twisted Arcade or whatever else?
Oh yeah. Well, you can connect with me on Instagram at Reynolds J. You can feel free to reach out to me there. Some of y'all just may have some very specific questions. Feel free to email me, jayr@gethope.net. Steve, we hang out in a lot of the same Facebook youth pastor groups. Feel free, find me on Facebook, some of those groups. I'm willing to chat and share. I years ago, I mean, being in ministry for a long time, like yourself, it's just what, somebody asked me recently, like, "Hey, what are you doing to just raise up the next generation? How do you take the experience you have And man, I know it's some of the dynamics you can look at it like, oh, you're part of a large church. Like, are you approachable? All this kind of stuff. I'm like, I don't look, somebody has a question. I try to find time to just come alongside and ask, and reach out. And so some of y'all listening on the other side, hey, be eager to ask a question. Myself, Steve, other folks, just be present. And if you're inquiring, just reach out, hang out, golly, send me an email. I'll pick up the phone and call you. I typically call people on my drive home. I have about 30-40 minute drive home. So I'm more than willing to, pick up the phone and chat as well.
Well, thanks again so much, Jay, for being on the podcast and for sharing all of your experience and your wisdom, especially in transitioning kids into our ministry as well. And I know a lot of people have probably learned a lot today and have lots of different things they're thinking about. So thank you so much for all that, and just pray that God blesses your ministry.
Man, I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Steve.
I hope what Jay has shared today can really help you improve your process. But I also had a couple other ideas I wanted to share from other youth pastors I recently talked to. Jerry Varner said that they have a youth leader drop in on their 5th grade class during the year. And then a few weeks before promotion happens, they get a preview of what student ministry looks like. And then on the day of promotion, they have a fun, welcoming event and have the older students welcome them into the ministry. They also use high schoolers in middle school small groups as co-leaders alongside the adults, which has also made a huge difference. And Ty Hogue says they bring the new students in at the very beginning of May, and they do a lot of activities to help build excitement and community. He also added that summer trips and events are great at helping the students transition well. I've also done something very similar to Jay, Jerry, and Ty, where I'm intentional about connecting with students way before they actually graduate from kids ministry. And then I love doing some preview days and parent meetings just before the transition. And I lean into the summer as well. And for ministries where I've had small groups, having those volunteer leaders in place way ahead of the transition has helped a ton as well. I'm curious what you all do as well, so please reach out to us on social media or with an email to studentministryconnection@gmail.com. And if you found this episode helpful, I'd love for you to do 2 things. First, please share this with other youth leaders you know. And second, please leave a positive review on your podcast app of choice. This really helps us to not only grow our community here, but it also helps me to continue getting great guests like Jay. And if you'd like to support my ministry with National Network of Youth Ministries, please follow the link in the show notes, where you can sign up for our prayer partnership team and also our financial partnership team. I want to extend a huge thanks to all those who have already partnered with me. And if you're interested in joining my team, please follow that link in the show notes or reach out to me. I would love to talk to you more about how you can partner with this ministry. And before we go, I also want to thank G Shades for sponsoring this episode. Check out their website at gshades.org and use the promo code CONNECTION to save $20 off your order. And while you're over there, be sure to check out their blog and also the book from G Shades founder, Mike Haynes. I'm heading out to Atlanta for the Orange Conference this next week, and I really hope to see some of you there. If you see me, please be sure to say hello. Also, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube so you get future episodes as soon as they're published. And until next time, be sure to stay connected, and may God bless your ministry.